powerful as our sun. We put 64 Vortex 8s together, which we called the Vortex 512, because it had 512 pixels. And used the Korean source LNX system, created a monster of a light, which was game-changing for us.
My name is Erik. I'm a cinematographer. I'm most known for Ozark, Special Ops Lioness, and soon-to-be upcoming show Ransom Canyon on Netflix. That's that. As a cinematographer, to me, light is everything. Sculpting light to me is how I tell a story. Profoto as a brand is known for their quality of light. To me, it's exciting to be able to bring that into the cinema world. Using the L1600D on set makes my job easier and faster without a ballast. You can rig it in ways that other lights can't be rigged. What delicate work. It's much more versatile than a 1.8K HMI. It's small, you can plug it into a wall, and it's more powerful and more energy efficient. They have over 50 modifiers, but there's also a Bowens mount, so you can do an infinite amount of third-party modifiers. I feel like this light will change the way we work. What I love most about the L1600D is the power of the light, the quality of the light, which is beautiful. And then when you couple that with their cinema ecosystem of modifiers that you can make it an incredibly versatile light, it really brings out the best in an LED light.
Hello. Thank you everybody so much for joining. My name is Naida Albright and I work with Filmmakers for Red. Today, as you can see, we have a wildly talented panel. We've got Rob Hardy on my left here, Ben Kračun, Stefan Pehrsson, and Erik Winquist at the end there. So please, give me a hand. Before we begin, I just wanted to encourage you to raise your hand and ask questions as we go, because I always forget the question. I may, or depending on what's going on, I may or may not call on you, but if I do, please stand up and please wait for them to give you a microphone, because we definitely won't be able to hear. So with that being said, I'm going to begin with my first question. And one of the reasons I brought these four men together is that, in my opinion, most of the popular projects that they've been a part of have been somewhat dark or even sometimes bleak themes. And I'm interested in finding out how you guys build these worlds that characters inhabit, that are often trapped in. The natural world, the inside of a computer world, terrifying worlds of their own making, and the thing that I think they have in common for me is that I believe the story and I easily extend my disbelief. So I'm going to start with you, Rob, because of your many projects with Alex Garland. I recently watched Men and Civil War when it was released, for example. Two very different worlds, yet terrifying in many ways for the viewer. How do you prepare for a feature film that is pushing the limits of reality with a director who also wrote the story? And what are your first, ambitions for it, or your concerns when you start, looking at a lookbook or working with the director? What are your first things that you do?
Hello, everyone. Well, I think every director is different, firstly, and the thing with Alex is that our working relationship is always the same in terms of the way in which we prep, and it's always been which is quite good for this panel, actually. It's always been about world building. So we always start with a blank canvas, and obviously we have the script, but there is never really necessarily, and I've said this before with regards to my work with Alex, is that we tend not to reference things as much as possible.
Really?
And that isn't a sort of conscious thing. I think it's very much an unconscious approach. Because the scripts are so economical, and they're so, I guess, visual in a way without being descriptive. So you almost completely, immediately understand where you are in terms of place and location, all that kind of stuff. But we like to see it like a blank canvas, as I said, simply because it means that we can go anywhere, and I think that's the key. We want to create a film. We always want to create a film that can stand on its own merits, in a way, and can exist in its own universe, without that sense that somehow, everything is influenced by everything, right?
Okay.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
But our influences tend to be sort of, we'll look at each other and there might be it might be like, okay, well, maybe it's a bit like The Thing, or something like that. But it's not necessarily, we're not looking at pictures and photographs and movies. We just don't do any of that stuff. Whereas with other directors, it's been different. The approach is very different. And it's from person to person.
So, that's interesting. I'm gonna get back to that. Stefan, you won an Emmy for USS Callister.
I was nominated.
Nominated, sorry. In my heart, he did. Black Mirror episode is one of my favorites. But you shot many more Black Mirrors, and you just finished some of the 7th season, I believe?
Yes, done 2 for this latest season coming out this year.
Fantastic. So, how do you plan?
How do I plan? But again, like Rob, it really depends on the director. So I work a lot with a guy called Toby Haynes. He's done quite a few of these Black Mirrors, and I think the great thing about Black Mirrors is it's an anthology show, so every episode is sort of its own thing. It's a little mini movie, so you get to sort of play in different universes. And the one we did that came out last year, part of season 6, was a thing called Demon 79, and that was all set in the 70s, and it was this young woman working in a shoe store who meets up with a demon, and then she has to go out and murder 3 people, or the apocalypse will happen. So quite dramatic. But what was great about it was called Demon 79, and it was set in 1979. So instantly we sort of thought, well, maybe we should sort of get a feeling of the 70s, and we thought to do that would be to do it through the 70s horror movies of the, and if you could find a horror movie made in Britain in the north of England, that's where it was set. That was sort of the peak. So we found a few of those, and it was really nice to see the texture and the color and the kind of stuff that they use for those films, and we just tried to ingrain that as much. So that sort of kicked us off for sure.
Yeah.
Set us into that world, and then because it's a horror film and she murders people, then also there's 2 sides of it. So we had we murdered. She murders people in her fantasy. She imagines what murdering a person might feel like, and we thought that was going to lead into more like a fantasy version, which we then sort of linked up with giallo films, you know, the Italian sort of fake blood, when the blood's sort of almost
Great.
pink, and you know,
Yeah.
that kind of sort of really fake, artificial fantasy. And then when she has to murder someone for real, it gets quite gruesome. So yeah, anyway, that was sort of where we went. So with that particular one, we certainly looked at sources. Yeah.
I told you guys it'd be bleak, didn't I? Well, Ben, speaking of, how did you prepare with Coralie, is it Fargate? How do you pronounce her last name?
Farja.
I knew I'd do that wrong. On the recent feature, The Substance, and she also wrote it, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And produced it and edited it.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
So yeah, I hadn't obviously I hadn't met Coralie before this. We met on Zoom originally. Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's the script. Her script is very descriptive. It is actually online, so you could take a look. It has like 29 pages of dialogue. So immediately you're in a world that's very, you know, she's describing everything. The apartment, like where Elizabeth lives, you know, how she goes around the city. And then you realize quite quickly that it's illusionary, you know, it's not a real LA. So
Yeah.
that was basically the first starting point. And Coralie would say, like, oh, I just want like bright sun. The sun has to be like really bright all the time, you know. So all these little pieces I try and pick up, obviously, and I try and get in her brain as much as possible to try and, put together. And that's with the designer as well, because again, if you're creating an illusionary world, as it was in The Substance, it was all mostly filmed on stage, and some of it in the south of France, the exteriors. And again, when I joined, it was possibly gonna like, oh, maybe we'll do like a week in LA, and then quickly, you know, money, X, Y, Z, it was like, no, we're gonna create our own, like Los Angeles completely. And so then you're really looking at like, you know, I would go down to Nice and Cannes, and I'd be like, well, how are we gonna do this? And you know, very quickly it became really clear that maybe, you know, we don't need so many. It's almost like reducing it down. What do you need? What is LA? What is Elizabeth's LA? What is this world? And, you know, we'd taken photos of like a palm tree, blue sky, a pink wall, and literally that's what we got, you know? And it's, so really like, it was a kind of process of really, defining what is in her world, and then what we need to show, like what is it, and a lot of it is symbolic, or
Right.
So it could be exaggerated, you know what I mean, because of that. So
So one of the reasons we also have Erik on the panel is, you know, once these gentlemen begin this process, there is usually a time where there's some visual effects that, you know, it's either practical effects, visual effects. So Erik, you were the visual effects supervisor on all of the Planet of the Apes, and congratulations on your second Oscar nomination for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes.
Thanks.
Fantastic. This is world building in a completely different way, and so how do you prepare for this kind of project when it's a different director, different writers, and character creators? You know, more important, what is pre-production for you when you're working with these men?
It's a lot of conversation.
Yeah, I
mean,
know.
I think
Yeah.
it's so important for me, for you know, our discipline to be so dialed into, you know, the DP's process, to obviously with where the director is going as far as the story goes, to figure out, you know, what is the language that is going to be used through this. Are we going to be doing a lot of, you know, really steady camera work? Is it going to be a lot of handheld? Because inevitably with some of the larger visual effects stuff, that is going to somehow impact us down the line. We're going to have to probably be doing some full CG things. That stuff might be coming, you know, long after we've wrapped. You know, the actual kind of discovery of some of these things might start. Ideally, it starts with some kind of a previs process. I mean, on Kingdom, for example, you know, I was actually kind of shocked how little previs we did for a film of that size. Because with for anybody who's familiar with Wes Ball, you know, he got his toe in as a director by doing a 3D animated film, you know, himself, a short film. So he comes from our world, so to speak.
Interesting.
And so there was a lot of shorthand that I had with Wes on this one that I maybe didn't have as much of with Matt Reeves, you know, and Michael Saracen on the last two.
Right.
Which was a really interesting change of the way this thing worked. But inevitably, that previous process, you know, that starts in prep, but once we get into post-production, Gyula Pados, who was our DP on Kingdom, he was off on his next job, and this is the problem we always find, and that's the real benefit of things like the LED walls, because it allows you guys to actually be involved in the actual process of not just what it's going to look like, but how it's lit, all that kind of stuff along the way. But LED walls are good for some things, but they're not good for everything. So it gets into this conversation about how to, I guess, eventually, can we work to a world where the DP is more involved in the post-production aspect of it, or available somehow? But it's a tricky thing with,
Yeah. Well, we have a clip, and James, you can just cut the sound on the whole thing, but Eric's gonna talk over it real quick. Tell me about the previs, kind of the low-key previs that you did. Well, we're looking at, you can lower the lights a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, you probably should lower the lights.
Yeah, okay, great. You can lower them down.
Yeah, so what we're seeing here, we had a complex oneer as part of this village attack sequence in the first act of the movie that it was going to involve a lot of complex camera work, and the best way to communicate this. Now, what we're seeing here is previs that Gyula did himself over, I want to say it was over the course of a weekend. He got into Unreal Engine some time ago and finds it a really useful tool for working out how he may want to approach a shoot. And it's super crude, but the thing that really is set up is it was a brilliant way to communicate with stunts, with production design, with special effects of what they were going to need to bring on the day. And ultimately allowed him to even explore, time of day and how much firelight was going to be present, how much did we want to see, kind of the dusk in the sky, and all that stuff. And it also helped then inform the process. And so the way we ended up ultimately shooting this was we had 2 nights where we actually were going to shoot what you see in the movie. But in order to do that, we had to be really dialed in with the actual camera operation. So once we get through this, there'll be a couple of clips coming up where you can actually see us going through kind of our rehearsal/capture process, because we would go through and we would actually capture the performances, in the afternoon or heading towards late in the day, so that we were ready to actually, try a couple of takes when the light was just right for the location. And you can see the whole thing was done, with a slingshot type rig, handheld but steadied, and it meant that Ryan Wyson, our A-camera operator here, had to absolutely just learn muscle movement, or muscle memory, basically, because what you see in the final film is a clean plate, ultimately. We had to put the performances that we had captured earlier into this, which meant that Ryan had to figure out his counts and retrace his steps when there was nobody in the frame to frame up on. And so this goes on for about 90 seconds. I think originally we ended up shortening it by chopping some bits out and doing some blending in the final film. But the previs drove this. I mean, the entire thing that we see here was possible because Gyula and Wes had figured out what they wanted to put on screen while we were still in prep before we went and shot it, and we had an easy way to communicate with everybody. So, like I said, we didn't do most of the planning of what we did on Kingdom was storyboarded. We didn't do a lot of intricate previs, but this was one of the handful of moments in the movie that it felt absolutely essential, because there was so much buy-in that we had to get from every other department. How much gas did special effects have to bring on the day? How much of it was going to be done by post-production? How many stunt players did stunt team have to bring into the mix? What was the requirements from production design? All those kind of things. And ultimately, that set us up for success, because this shot obviously was going through post-production for months and months and months. But if we hadn't gotten that original material on the night, it would have been, probably it would have had to have been a lots of full CG that nobody wanted. And this allowed us to actually execute, what we did in this one particular example of the film. But it was a really interesting, and you can see another example here from a different scene. Just I threw this in just because it was, I guess, what you're looking at, that slingshot, that was how we shot so much of this movie. Even when the camera was on a crane or other head, it was sort of typically driven by an IMU kind of shoulder rig, so that the entire film had this handheld feel to it. Nice. And that was, I guess, that was a big part of the visual idea of what we were doing here.
Yeah, thank you. That was amazing. And speaking of cameras, and by 2025, I feel like all the high-end cameras, they're loaded with features. We're really dialing it in. And for anybody who wants to jump in here, is there any part of that initial testing process that might be different when you know you're going to be working with a good amount of visual effects, during the test?
I'll answer.
Yeah.
I think often I found the relationship, the best part of our relationship between visual effects and cinematographer is that idea that, and again, is a good example here in the clip, is that sense that you're trying to authenticate something. And by doing that, it means that any kind of choices that you make quite early on with regards to aesthetic should feel, in my opinion at least, as natural as possible. And so you go to great lengths to make it feel like what you're seeing really does exist, even though, of course, the mind is telling you it doesn't in this case.
Right.
But specifically when you're dealing with visual effects that are, I guess, much more invisible.
Invisible, yeah.
And what you're saying is the
supporting visual effects.
Supporting visual effects. You are dealing with something. You need to get out of the sort of uncanny valley vibe, and I think with regards to then making camera choices, I mean, I personally tend to just make. We'll have a discussion, and then a choice is made that is just simply the movie. It's what is the movie, and what, I remember very early on with Ex Machina, we had that support with Andrew Whitehurst, who was with DNEG at the time, and my lens choices, camera choices were very much really about the film itself, and much less about what would the end result be. So we didn't have blue screen, we didn't have any of that stuff, and he came from a sort of photographic background, so it meant that it was just literally, okay, we'll work around it and we'll fit everything in, because it comes back to the idea of authenticating something.
Okay.
I think that's
also that's a new development. I sort of found out, not that long ago. You were told that this is the camera and it has to be a spherical lens, and this is the only way we can do it. Otherwise, we can't track it. But I certainly find now that that's not the case anymore.
No.
You can use whatever you want. You can have your old vintage glass, where all the lens elements wobble around. You can still somehow manage to track that and get the VFX shot working.
Yeah.
So that's amazing.
It's been a huge part of focus for me of the last handful of years, because we were shooting this was on C-series Panavision lenses that were pretty wonky, beautifully wonky, right? But it required a whole new level of profiling to make sure that the stuff that we were adding into those images had the same characteristics, or the stuff that we were doing that might be full CG could also have the same aesthetic.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a question on the front row, and while you get a microphone to him, Ben, did you want to add to, in terms of?
I actually did use different cameras.
Yeah.
But I would echo what Rob was saying, which is, on the substance, it was more like, Coralie wanted to do everything for real. Almost like she didn't want visual effects, or didn't you ever want to see the visual effects? So you're trying to kind of really integrate it perfectly. Do you know what I mean? Or you don't want to ever jump out or whatnot. And I would say, again, it was Brian Jones was the visual effects supervisor on it. And I think he pretty much started the day I started. And we kind of almost started testing and things together, So even with certain cameras, because I wanted to shoot with a certain camera, but he needed a certain amount of K for certain pieces. So it was quite, we did end up using a red camera for certain VFX shots. But I'd say that relationship was really kind of quite key in a way. And I think it's key because it worked super well, and you're also, I don't know if a lot of people know, because there's, especially in the last third, there's large parts where VFX played quite a crucial role, where you wouldn't maybe assume they have,
Yeah.
And that's like, a good example of that is in the Monstro section, where you first come out from the mirror and Elizabeth is on the back.
Yeah.
Now, I shot it was the Monstro suit was made, and Coralie wanted to get as close as she could. We had she was on the back of the suit was like a sort of fixed kind of scream,
It's
almost. Elizabeth in a scream.
Incredible.
But, and she was like, I
Very.
want to get close. You know, and it's quite interesting
Yeah.
because when you lose character, you still have to have that identification. And Corley was like, I need to go right over her face and see her scream. And obviously that was then going to be VFX, that part. So that's like that shot is completely built together with, you know, the elements that I shot, and then, you know, Brian pulling it even further so we go as close as we can
That's
over
nice.
the face. So it's, but it feels very like in keeping with the picture,
does.
you know.
Thank you. Okay, if you don't mind standing up. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jordan Williams. Questions for Benjamin. You sound like you was, I guess, like the closest to like the spreadsheets in terms of like being that she's a producer as well. You're having maybe a more of an insight to the numbers behind the decisions that you're making in terms of the budgeting, et cetera, or if not, did you work with an art designer or an art director? And what were some of the conversations like when it came to producing and staying on budget, or even requesting a budget to get things done?
That's a lot. That's too much.
Sorry.
That's too long. Thank you.
Thank you.
You don't have to answer that.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
I mean, I wasn't so, you know, I was dealing with Corley on a, mainly as a director. Yeah, there's obviously always budgetary, you always get a kind of ballpark, I think, when you start a film.
Do you ever get told the numbers? I never get told the numbers.
I mean, you can sometimes ask, and you get told some numbers and some figures.
So if they see us like infants or little children, we're not allowed to have numbers.
I mean, it's an interesting part because the camera, yeah, as a DOP, you do not get, you know, like production design, they get given a budget, and they spend their budget. Our budget goes to the line producer.
Yeah.
So I never see that
Right.
budget. So that's always like you and the line producer are like, you either get along, you don't get along. You know, so that's, it's quite crucial. But I think if you know a rough ball, it's very handy to know a rough ballpark. And yeah, of course I did, and we all did, and we were all working within that.
The limitations.
Yeah, of course. And those are great. I mean, the limitations are kind of
Absolutely.
what make it.
I think sometimes it can literally be the case of like, if you pan right, maybe a couple of inches, that shot is going to cost you $100 grand. Whereas if you just stay left, you're good. You know, sometimes it is like that. And then,
Yeah.
you know, I think that to your point is it's the only time really where you understand or you get a real insight into the numbers. But there's also, I mean, I've worked on films where it's been like, okay, we have visual effects play such a huge part of what we're doing. It's like in the case of Men, for example, but we knew that we had to hit those numbers, and we knew what the numbers were, and we knew that we had a list of shots that were going to be leaning quite heavily into that world. And so we would be quite precise about it. There was a lot of precision involved, but at the same time, you have to kind of give that sense that there is, it's happening naturally. What you're seeing is happening naturally. I mean, this is someone giving birth to themselves 9 times over, which is not that natural, but
It was a great movie, if you haven't seen it.
But it's still,
Amazing.
you know, there is an awareness, and that was quite a stripped down budget for that film. So
Yeah.
we did feel the limitations a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, Rory was insanely talented in that movie. Yeah, it was so good. And Erik, kind of on this note, and I don't even understand it enough to ask the question appropriately, but are there visual effects that are closer to camera and lens extension? Can you talk a little bit about like kind of Dave was talking with us on the email.
Visual effects that are closer to camera, or
Yeah, kind of, or it like.
as in like a proximity to the lens?
Or like anything within the lens. Where he said something about a lens extension, or I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, we were sort of talking about, and it was kind of touching on what I was getting onto before. Is
Yes.
I think in very recently, I've been going down deep rabbit holes about how to profile, like actually building rigs that I can take with me to wherever we happen to be shooting, so I can take the lens package and actually profile things like the point spread function, right? So
Okay.
across the entire field of the lens, so that the way that light spreads and diffracts and refracts and it just gets all nice and smudged and munged around the edges, all the beautiful stuff that the lenses, vintage lenses, detuned lenses, all that stuff that we're seeing that you guys are shooting, that there's a choice was made specifically to capture those kind of aesthetics. We need to replicate those things. So it's getting into lately visual effects, like where we're going with this stuff. It's no longer just shoot a grid so we can match the distortion. It's every little factor, every little nuance of the way the lens flares, which we're seeing lots of fantastic examples of these days, but also just optically, like measuring the spectral transmission through the lens, so that we know that it's a little bit yellow-green, but specifically why it's yellow-green now, which ties into the way that, particularly Weta affects the way we render. So there's all that kind of stuff that comes in the mix now. It's gotten incredibly complex, and that's a really fun place to be, at least for me.
Yeah, I mean, is it a metadata thing that's finally enabled you to lock it in?
That certainly comes into the mix, and I will say to the room, dear God, do whatever you need to do to get your VFX team per frame metadata. Like digital camera systems, they got a booth out there. Go talk to them. Make sure that they're using those boxes, because I cannot stress enough how important metadata is, to what we're doing these days. You rack focus. That lens breathes. Like if we can know exactly what the curve is doing, my God, we can dial everything into it without turning everything into a big science project every shot. Which brings costs down. So.
Yeah. Stefan, have you experienced some of this before? You were shaking your head.
I have. I know. I did a Black Mirror, the one I was Emmy nominated for. We were told that we could only use master anamorphic because they were the only thing that could track. It was just that thing where. So it was almost like shooting it on a spherical lens. Because the master anamorphics, to me anyway, they're quite boring. Sorry, Cook. But it's great that I find now that you can, when you have these effect shots. I did a show called SAS Rogue Heroes, and we shot it all on these Kawa lenses, which are the most bendiest, weird, have all sorts of things going wrong with them, but it looks amazing. So we shot with that, and then whenever we had to do a VFX shot, the VFX department did say, "Can you please not shoot on that? Can you shoot on a spherical lens?" But then they would take the artifacts of the Kawa and they would put into those shots. So the shots, even though they were shot spherical and suddenly all the lines are straight and not bendy, they managed to then, embed them and make them feel like they was all shot with the same lens.
I would say that I don't want to ever try and put creative constraints on the DP, and when it comes down to, oh, please don't shoot this with that lens, except for framing things. Obviously, if you're shooting anamorphic, we got nothing above and below the frame line. Yeah. So sometimes I might say, hey, what if we had a really clean spherical, exactly as you're describing?
Yeah.
Like, so then we've got the freedom to rack up and down if we just need to slightly adjust something for the framing.
Yeah.
But then we can put all that profiled information back on top of it and make it look like it was whatever you wanted it to be.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Rob, we were talking about.
Make me jump.
I know. Sorry. Wake up.
I was over there listening.
Yeah, I know. You're working on something that you might be able to touch on, or no?
Yeah, I can't really talk about it in detail, obviously, but just with regards to your to what you were saying in terms of the kind of the approach in terms of lenses, it's like I'm working on a project at the moment where it's a big film and it's lots of action, and we have I've got camera platforms that are very different, but everything is joining together. So I have cameras that are enabling me to move very fast and be quite intimate with things and get into tight spaces, and then we have cameras and lens packages that enable us to be quite expansive, and it literally is like one end of the scale and the other end of the scale in terms of lenses, and it's quite an interesting approach that we have together with VFX, and how, to what you were saying earlier, how there's lots more enabling and there's lots more. It's about the detail. So, for example, I have a set of lenses that I'm told by the people that we're renting them from. There's only one in existence. There's only one set, and they're very old, and they are extraordinarily beautiful. And each one is very different in the set. And then I also have included in the package, at the other end of the scale, a set of lenses that you can buy domestically for like 300 quid. And we're using those things to achieve the same goal. So, and their characteristics are quite different, but in my mind there is a relationship between those two things. And it's really interesting to delve into the idea of what you're saying about those characteristics, the flare characteristics, and also the way in which, you know, a specific kind of light is going to work. Like, for example, LED light is going to react very, very differently to old tungsten units, which I tend to lean quite heavily on. And so we talk about doing, you know, flare libraries, if you like. And there's something we did years ago, actually, on Annihilation. We created a kind of flare library of very old glass, and even glass that we weren't using on the show. And how that then sort of relates to the back end. And often I'm going quite heavy on the flare at the moment with it. And Jeff, the VFX supervisor, will quietly whisper to me and say, "Rob, do you think we can? Do you think maybe we could do a clean pass?" But with the understanding that, you know. But it's a great. It's an interesting one, because there is that sense that when everybody sees what's happening, when you see it on the monitors and the actors get to see it in the world that we've created, coming back to that world building thing, is that when you walk onto the set, it does feel like a real environment, no matter what the scale is. And then when people see what's happening visually on the monitors and the takes that we're doing, it gives a real sense of like, okay, this is the movie, this is it. We're doing it, we're in the world, knowing that, you know, I'm going to give Jeff his clean passes, and it will be okay, you know. So I think it's, but it all comes back to that idea of that I always think about, is that I keep saying it, authenticating something and making it feel, for the audience, you know, you want to make it feel as real as possible.
Yeah, but that also requires that trust, you know, between you and the soup. That, you know, if I was asking the DP, like, hey, can we maybe just do it? Like, it's like you need to trust that I will absolutely want to honor what you're trying to do. Give me the tools to do that. And
I think you're absolutely right, and it's such an important relationship, and we have that great relationship where it's like we trust each other. It's like, yes, we both want the same thing, because we've got to this point during prep. We've really, you know, we've gone quite deep with it, and we've all decided this is everybody's. By the time we get to day one, everybody understands what our goal is, you know, and of course that will change on a daily basis. But it's like you have the foundation. And
Ben, on the substance, especially beginning with another birth out the back.
Yeah, that was multiple lenses, yeah.
Okay.
So it was,
yeah.
But it's also something that I've only really kind of properly explored, I would say, in the last few movies that I've done. Yeah, it was because before I would be very much like, it's one set, it's one camera, it's one. But because Coralie, very early on, I could see, because we boarded obviously all the bigger sequences, and I could see she wanted to be wide and she wanted to be super, super close. Like almost starting like really, really wide and then going right into an eye. That was like happening a lot. Or we were spinning 360, then going into the eye. You know what I mean? So it was quite like, I was like, well, wow, okay. So yeah, those sequences were built using multiple different lenses and focal lengths, and yeah, sometimes completely different lengths. You know, because it would go into almost like you know, boroscope lenses and stuff like that.
Like blend the shots.
Yeah. So, but what? And again with Brian, quite early on, I did like a full test at the camera house in Paris, which we did that whole birth sequence, you know, just ourselves with like a double, and there was a few of us, and it was a great way. Because you know, at first I thought like, well, no, actually, maybe Margaret could wear the helmet cam and we could do it on the Komodo and all that. And then you start to realize, no, that's going to be pretty weighty. She's thinking about what she needs to be thinking. You know, it becomes quite apparent that actually that's not, you know, you need to sort of weed that all out well before you're on the set. So, and the sequence was so big that, yeah, so we started testing that, we're probably like a few weeks in. And it was great. And Ryan even put that sequence together. You know, it was built of, and then we could see which ones worked, when it didn't work. And yeah, there's like when it comes back out, there's a piece where it had to go from point of view to sort of an objective view. So you're in her view and then you're out. And we would have only got that she sort of flicks her hair. So it comes out, you're in her POV and she flicks her hair and you're behind her. And that was, you know, we only discovered that from doing that test. Because it was like, okay, wow, how do we get out of this? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So,
That's nice.
and yeah.
Well, sadly, we have 1 minute left.
wow.
This went
That's
really fast. I guess, anybody have like one more thing to say? I was going to wrap this up anyway with saying there are a lot of emerging cinematographers and filmmakers here.
There's a question there.
Okay, we're going to give it over to this nice gentleman. Jump up, do loud because we literally only have 1 minute. There it is. Okay, she's got.
Hello, my name's Grant Kirkman. I'm a film director. And the question I wanted to ask you was, at what age did you realize you had a creative eye for moving image? And when did it incorporate itself into the technological world of film?
You each have 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, my grandmother had a VHS camera, which I loved playing with. And I think I probably was around 12. But I sort of assumed that everybody had their own VHS camera, and I guess these days everybody have their own iPhone. But at the time, not everybody had a VHS camera, but I assumed that everybody else did. And then I did a film course, and then I suddenly realized that the bits that I've been doing at home, you know, playing around with my grandmother's VHS camera was actually, you know, something that I could do slightly better than other people. So then I thought maybe I should carry on doing that.
How about you guys? Anybody else?
I was 8 years old.
Well done. Eric?
I think for me, I was certainly into stills photography at quite a fairly young age, but it wasn't until I probably got to art school to really kind of get into computer animation that would have put me, 18 or so? Before I really got into moving images. Yeah.
Ben?
14? No, I think it was a bit late. I was not, we didn't have a VHS camera, and I was more into like blowing stuff up and building. I wasn't really into
I was doing with the VHS camera. I was building things to blow up in front of me.
Like I used to like to, As I lived in the countryside, I just used to like build dens and blow stuff up, and it wasn't like, I think it was much later for me, and also it came through stills because there was a stills camera in the house, and I started to take pictures, and then went to art school.
Fantastic. Well, everybody, thank you again for joining, and please give a round of applause to our panelists. Amazing.
Wow.